Hello, leavers and believers. Welcome to Leaving Hillsong. If it's your first time here, welcome along to our little show about what it's like to leave Hillsong, what it's like to question your faith, battle against people that you care about, and try and understand what community and God means, if those things exist at all. My name's Tanya, and I had a guest last week with me called Yolandi Bosch, who was the subject of a response by Hillsong's newsroom in 2020 after she had engaged with Business Insider and done an interview explaining her experiences at Hillsong College and some of the things that hadn't gone according to the brochures, shall we say. Now, Laura Hamilton had also been a part of that interview and was also named in the response. And as I was reading along, I was like, oh, Yolando, Laura Hamilton, I know her. And I will tell you that I had been in contact with Laura for some months just about Hillsong things. We'd messaged back and forth, so I had contact with her before and asked her if she would be willing to complete this article, which I will post the rest of, and talk to those concerns that she had and how Hillsong responded. So we're starting in part one of A Cult Within a Church, just finding out how Laura wound up in Hillsong College and what that was like when she was there. She grew up in a Christian home. She'll tell you more about it. These colleges are a huge concern. They're the core of these organisations, and what the students have to say is incredibly important. This is where a lot of the tax-free kind of stuff goes through, the education side of things. Clearly, I'm not an accountant, but as soon as you get a church, you get a college. Any pastor knows that. Then you can start leasing cars and printing t-shirts and claiming all kinds of things. So what the students have to say is incredibly important, and to speak out counter to what an organisation like Hillsong has to say is a pretty huge move. So without further ado, here's part one of A Cult Within a Church with Laura Hamilton. Hi Laura, how are you?
Going good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat with us about the rest of this response about the college. The college is such a big issue, and it's, there's a lot of reasons for that.
Well, anytime.
Did you want to fill us in quickly on how you wound up there?
Yeah. So, look, it was a bit of a, can I use the word journey? That's a bit of an annoying word these days.
Okay.
bit of a journey in getting to Hillsong. I found out about it when I was 16 years old, and I thought it'd be a really cool environment to head into after high school. And the thing with me is that I grew up in a Christian home. My family had sort of been everywhere when it comes to church. They'd been in the AOG, COC, CRC, Church of Christ Baptist, Presbyterian, Vineyard. So, yeah, we kind of been church hoppers, and a lot of that was to do with the fact that my parents really didn't agree with stuff like the Toronto blessing and prosperity teaching and the word of faith movement. I think by the time I was 16 and super keen to get to Hillsong, that stuff I think it had kind of died down in a sense. I feel like the Toronto blessing, or the catch the fire thing, as I think it became known, it sort of had its first round of bursts over the 90s, and then it wasn't the hot topic so much anymore. So I think, by the time Hillsong was a kind of presence in my life and therefore my family's lives, they really thought that brand of church wasn't the same as what the AOG had been previously back in the early 90s. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that. I mean, you hear it from different people who come from either, more orthodox or traditional backgrounds, or in some way kind of more restrictive backgrounds as well. And seems to be really appealing.
Yeah,
as well.
We had started going to a local Church of Christ. The thing with that Church of Christ is that they were spirit-filled. So I believe within that denomination, there's not as much of an emphasis on the gifts of the Spirit as what there might be in the Pentecostal denominations. I don't think Church of Christ is traditionally considered to be Pentecostal, but this particular one was. So, yeah, there was a lot of connection to Hillsong within that church.
Okay.
The format of the services was very in line with Hillsong. And of course, the leadership, they'd go after Hillsong conference every year. The pastors' wives would go to colour every year, and they'd come back refreshed and ready to ready to bring what they'd learned into the general populace of the church, I suppose. So by the time I was 18, I was in year 12. I was going to a Christian school and got to be about term 3, which is like winter here in Australia. And my Christian school, were doing this thing called Mission Week, which is basically just a week of kind of learning that's not to do with the regular curriculum. It's focused towards global Christian missions. So it was basically like a conference within the school, and we had lots of organizations like YWAM and Wycliffe and Watoto. They actually brought the Watoto Children's Choir to our school. So that week, every single day, kicked off with a chapel service. And on this particular morning, it was my job to get up on stage and sing How Great Is Our God. And just as I arrived on the school grounds, a friend comes up to me and she says, "Laura, have you heard the news? It's terrible." And I didn't know about any news. What that news was the news about Michael Guglielmucci,
which is
his cancer faking.
Wow. So when was that? 2008.
2008. So it was. I think the album was it This Is Our God, the Hillsong album, where he'd done his big stunt with the oxygen tank and he sang Healer.
So I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, Mike Guglielmucci was the son of another preacher man called Danny, who's one of the old boys of the AOG in South Australia, quite a senior person. And Mike had this cancer diagnosis and had written this hit song about being healed, and 3 years into it wasn't true.
Yes, so I had to get straight up on stage and process that as I led my whole school, which was a primary school and secondary school, through How Great Is Our God in the middle of winter, and it was outdoors. And I don't know if it was the cold or if it was just the shock, but towards the end, I just about had no voice left. Like, it was just such a huge shock, and all sorts of all sorts of thoughts were going through my mind. Like, what if they were all in on it? What if it wasn't just him? I had no context or information other than what my friend had told me.
Did you know him or anything? I mean, had you?
No, not personally.
Just the music stuff, yeah?
Well, I was never as much of a fangirl for Planet Shakers as I was for, say, Hillsong worship, but I knew them well. We performed. we played Planet Shakers songs in church and in youth group.
Yeah.
Knew the song Healer. That was a big hit. Even I feel like it was around before it was ever a Hillsong number. So yeah, but that being said, if that same friend who informed me that morning and we went to a conference at a large church in Melbourne to hear his father, Michael's father, Danny Guglielmucci, speak. I suppose he's just a bit of one of the big AOG guys, isn't he?
Yeah, he was on the national exec. He was at the Qantas meeting, I believe. He's one of the old
boys.
Yeah, from the old brigade.
So yeah, we'd gone to this conference. It was more my friend who was really enthusiastic about that. But yeah, I went along, so I knew who they were. But of course, when they did that collab on that Hillsong album, for me, as far as my awareness went, when his profile kind of blew up. So yeah, it was just a huge shock. And I just remember in the days that followed, well, the days, weeks, months that followed, I just felt really weird about it. I felt uncomfortable. And I just started to think more deeply about the sort of commercialized aspect of worship music and of the church in general at that time. So I decided that Hillsong College wasn't going to be for me, and that I'd take a gap year after school and just have a break from being a student for at least a year. What actually was going on at the same time, though, was that my parents made a decision that they were going to move to Sydney. My dad was in a, like a public service type job, meaning that relocation wasn't a very difficult thing for him. So yeah, they decided they wanted to move to Sydney. They wanted to be part of Hillsong. And I had 2 younger siblings, so they were going to pack up and move us up there. So, I was at a little bit of a loose end. I'd had jobs previously as a teenager, but during my year 12 year, I, hadn't had a job. So therefore I didn't really have any money of my own apart from my allowance from my parents. So I just figured, well, my parents are moving to Sydney. Maybe I'll go with them. And then that opened up another whole issue of I'm moving to a whole new city. I don't go to school. I'm not going to be in school. How am I going to meet people? So I thought, well, maybe I'll have a go at this Hillsong College thing after all. And maybe at the very least, it'll be a way to reestablish myself in a new city and maybe hopefully find a bit of a friendship circle and that kind of thing.
And what was it like when you got there?
When I got there, we got there just at the end of 2008. So we moved there several days before New Year's Eve.
And you weren't living there. I mean, you didn't need accommodation there. You were living at home, yeah?
Yeah, my parents, they got themselves a house out in the Hills district. They'd sold their house back in Victoria. Yeah, initially it was really cool. We went to Sydney New Year's fireworks at Circular Quay, and a couple of friends came with us to help us move. So it was just a fun time. We were having sleepovers and that kind of thing. But I didn't kind of break into any kind of, I didn't meet people prior to college starting. Apart from people who my parents met, I did go to, I don't even know what it was really. I don't know if it was to do with college, but it was some kind of creative team, like a meetup night, and it was at Hills. I think it was sort of down near the basement. And I did get chatting to, a couple of people in the worship team.
Okay, so when you first start college, what's that like?
Starting college was actually kind of daunting. And that is because I realized that most of the other students were not from Australia, at least out in Hills. I don't know if that was the case at the city campus. But yeah, at Hills, it turned out there were only a handful of Aussies or students from New Zealand. And that's not a problem at all, obviously. But what that meant was that they had already had all of that kind of ice-breaking kind of social
orientation stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that was more through the college housing thing, which I wasn't part of.
Yep.
So I had to try really hard to break in, and I had to be way more outgoing than I normally was. Like, I wasn't a super shy person, but yeah, it was just, it's like, I don't know, it's like going from a country town to the big city, if that makes sense.
Oh, look, I started a lot of new schools. It's hard to be the new kid. And I even remember like my first few days at uni, at Sydney Uni, well, weeks really, and you just see all these people in groups and you think, how'd that start? Where'd that come from? Like, I just got year 2. How come there's like 7 of you? Where were they all from? Americans at that stage?
A lot of people were from America. There were a lot of Canadians, and yeah, there were a lot of Scandinavian students.
Okay.
It was really great in that sense to meet people from different countries. But yeah, it was just that sort of initial thing with trying to meet people and make friends.
And in terms of the actual curriculum, what did you think of the education itself?
All right, so I was in the music stream. I think they were calling it Worship and Creative Arts, or WACA. And I had a really super cool facilitator who I think is one of their musical directors. And yeah, that aspect of college was really cool. And I did have a really great tutorial group. And yeah, there were a lot of opportunities to collaborate musically within that. So yeah, in terms of curriculum, I don't have any memories of doing any written work at all, apart from songwriting assignments.
And this is sorry, what is the actual qualification you were studying?
I think it was a Certificate 3 in creative ministries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which could mean anything, yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know how many other registered training organizations provide that. I'm sure that there are certificates at that level in, creativity and ministry or music ministry or whatever.
So at what point did things go not quite as well?
Okay, so things were great initially. Part of being a vocal major is I think you've got to go and do an audition, because I can understand they want to know, can people actually sing? Okay, so I got through that, and being a vocal major means that you serve on the choir. So I was in Sunday morning choir. I didn't have my driver's license at the time, so I was walking from the far end of Glenwood to Hills on a Sunday morning. Sometimes I could get a lift from mum or dad. Yeah.
How far is that?
Oh, look, it's a good, it's really about 3 Ks. So yeah, that was like a 6:30 a.m. start for rehearsal.
Okay, right. Okay. So you've got to walk at 6:30 in the morning to get there. Right.
Sometimes I could get a lift, but yeah, we were on the way other end of Glenwood. So most of the students were up on the end that was closer to Hills campus. Yeah, sometimes I could carpool with students, but yeah, so early start, they would provide breakfast. So yeah, I was on the choir. I had to do several other volunteer opportunities, and one of them was that I had to help out with a program called SAFE. SAFE is a support group for survivors of sexual abuse. Yeah, so what that was, it was setting up the space for those groups to be facilitated. I was running down to Coles to buy some snacks and stuff for the attendees of that program, and yeah, just setting it all up and then clearing out before they get there. No issue with that. I think that was on a Monday afternoon. It's just that I was wanting to try and meet people, and there was only one other person doing that with me. Really great person. We had some really cool conversations and whatever, but I was wanting to do something more like street teams, and I tried really hard to get into a street team. By that point, I had made friends in my tutorial group and outside of it, and yeah, it was just seemed really hard to get into the street team, and I wasn't successful in that.
Why do you think that is? Who are they choosing? And what is a street team? Sorry, just for... All
right, a street team. So they do community work. They might go and help, say, an older person with their garden, or they might help a single mother clean up her yard, or stuff like that. Kind of community service work in a way. Would you say?
Lawn mowing and that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is my opinion, because I wasn't part of that team, so I really can't talk much about who was in it, but it sounds like maybe they didn't want local students in that, or maybe they wanted to avoid having locals in that. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I
how come?
Well, what Yolandi was talking about with her wanting to get some help for a woman in a DV situation, and them not wanting to get involved, and she just said that she didn't have an awareness of what the local rules or laws or guidelines were around that kind of thing, whereas it's more likely that an Australian perhaps would.
And it might be too, culturally disorientating for people who've just arrived in the country. It might just operate better as a PR exercise than community interventions. If people aren't familiar with local services and laws and cultures and values and stuff. So,
well, maybe I'd be really interested to hear what Hillsong have to say about that.
Yeah, they involve a lot of trust as well. going to people's homes and that kind of stuff. Yeah. How much do the things that Yolandi was talking about resonate with you? Did you ever spend any time on Refresh, or do you know anything about that?
So I actually was on Clean Team. Clean teams were something that it was not so much at a conference. Back when I was doing Hillsong conference, they weren't calling it Refresh, they were calling it Excellence.
Ooh.
So Colour Conference, Hillsong Conference, it was called Excellence, and they had a day team and a night team.
That's right. I think we've heard that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But I was at Hills campus. I was on the Hills campus clean team. 1 or 2 nights a week, I was vacuuming the Hub Auditorium and the Hillsong Convention Centre. And that was the auditorium floor and the basement, the foyer. I don't remember having to do, any office spaces or anything apart from the public areas that would get traffic from students during the college hours. So yeah, I was doing clean team. I also was doing creche duty for healing services.
Okay. And you're what, sort of 18 at this stage?
I was 18. I turned 19 that year, early in the year.
With a childcare experience or training? Or?
No, I did have a volunteer working with the children check though.
Well, that's nice. I mean, that's just to make sure you're not a convicted child abuse offender. But it's, it's a big. It's a big responsibility for you. It's a big call for the parents. So, did they check your first aid training?
I didn't have first aid training.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. So apart from that, there was college every day. So it was a jam-packed schedule. So college every day there'd be a chapel service. So I think they would split up chapel into combined whole college chapel, and then they'd have little mini chapel services around them on the alternate days, and they would be smaller groups. And they would call those espresso chapel because they're short and powerful.
Was that the days of Gloria Jean's?
I'm pretty sure that was Gloria Jean's days, because they did have Gloria Jean's coffee carts after church.
Perfect.
And Gloria's was kind of the local watering hole for the students.
It was kind of an imperative, wasn't it?
That was till I defected and started going to Michelle's Patisserie.
Can't say things like that.
Actually, when I did those coffee runs later on when I was interning, that was the coffee shop of choice.
Ooh, someone's going to get hurt feelings over that. Be careful.
So yeah, there was chapel every day, and then there was our music related class that was like 1 block, and then there was like a pastoral leadership tutorial group that I was in. Angela Buckley was my tutorial leader for that. And then we would have big combined lectures, usually in the Hub Auditorium, because it was the bigger small space, if that makes sense. And yeah, that's when we get speakers like Robert Ferguson, a lot of Lee Burns, Sanger, all the guys. Yeah. So there was that. There was Connect Group Monday night, once a fortnight. On Thursday mornings, there was the Hillsong Women's Service. So my volunteer roles for that were to be on car park duty, so directing the women attending that service in the car park or to a car park. And then I was on atmosphere, and that's basically being a seat filler. I went to Powerhouse Youth Group on Friday nights. The rule was that you had to serve at 2 weekend services and attend 2 of them. So I was going to Saturday night church just as an attendee, and then serving in 2 services on the choir on a Sunday morning, back to back, and then attending Sunday night services.
Okay, so I mean, what kind of hours are we looking at there?
I don't remember ever having like a family dinner during that time, because I just sort of lived at church. I felt like I'd get there in the morning for college, kind of around maybe 8:30 or so. And I just remember, if I wasn't doing something like in a volunteer capacity, I was kicking around waiting for the next thing to start. So yeah, I think most of my meals were had around Hillsong or down at the local shopping mall. Yeah, I spent most of my time at church or doing, church related activities. In terms of hours, I would say that I was quite often on the go from like 8:30 in the morning until probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night most days. But
Wow, that's a lot.
you know how when you go to Connect group, it can go on a bit because it's also a social thing. So there's sort of not necessarily a time limit on what time it ends.
And how did the social thing progress in the end? So you were, it was daunting in the beginning and there are all different cultures just in the one place. How did it work out over time?
So most of my friends turned out to be Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah, I just sort of ended up, really getting along with a couple of Canadian girls, and I joined their Connect group. Yeah, there were quite a lot of students from the United States. So I did have a good friendship circle, and they were all ages from late teens into early to mid 30s. Yeah, there was a married couple in my tutorial group who are a little bit older than me. They were really super supportive. I think they were from Canada. Yeah, I did have a lot of friends from South America. So yeah, it turned out to be really good in that regard. The first sort of big event in my memory when it comes to the Hillsong annual calendar, I think, is the Colour Your World Women's Conference. That was the first big Hillsong event that students got to be part of, make happen, really. And to be entirely honest with you, Colour Your World was probably the most positive experience that I had while I was at Hillsong.
What's that?
Well, unlike Hillsong Conference or, the other events that they put on, a lot of effort, at least at that time, was put into the manner by which students treat each other and the conference delegates. It was all about building an environment that was friendly and inviting and warm and supportive. And I've got to say, they really did put effort into fostering that amongst the students. So, yeah, it was just this sort of environment of elevated positivity and support. I was on the hosting team in the main auditorium of the Sydney Entertainment Centre.
Okay, what do you do as a host?
Basically being like an usher in a theatre.
Okay. I mean, that's a kind of a nice role to play at a conference.
Yeah, and you get to see everything that's going on the stage too. So you really feel like you're not just part of it, but making it happen. And like it was like being a face of colour to those conference attendees.
Oh, is that something you could put on a resume?
I tried. Don't think anyone cared. So Colour Your World was really great, really fun. It was at Darling Harbour, and I expected Hillsong Conference to be the same, to have the same feel, the same vibe, the same levels of support and camaraderie and that kind of thing. And it just wasn't. Kind of from that point on, because Colour, it's pretty early on in the year. I think it's in March, or it was in March back then. And what had started to happen to me was that I started to develop a cough. It didn't go away. It just got worse and worse. And while it was happening, I thought, is it just some irritation? I put it down to the kind of environmental aspect of always being at a church service in the way that they run their services. So, and I talk about it in the Business Insider article, that all up over the course of 1 week, I'd be present in about 12 or 13 services put on by Hillsong, whether it was youth or chapel at college or espresso chapel or main church, Saturday night church. There was also creative team night, the Hillsong women's service. It was repeated exposure to, air conditioning, refrigerated air conditioning, and fog from the fog machines. And it just never went away, to the point where I felt like I was constantly on the brink of having a coughing fit. So as a singer, that was, it was a real problem for me because I was exhausted from coughing. I lost a lot of strength from my voice. And I just came to really dislike the feeling of singing because I felt so sort of tensed up and always trying to hold off from having a coughing fit. And it just became really unenjoyable to me, the feeling of singing, when it had been something that I did really enjoy previously. So yeah, I just thought it's got to be something to do with this repeated smoke. And or smoke, when I say smoke, I mean artificial smoke or fog. Back then, I really didn't want to complain. I didn't want to come across as negative or critical of the way that they did things. And I just really felt like I was the only one. I didn't talk to any facilitators at college about it. I didn't talk to any friends about it. I just kept it to myself, but I did end up changing my instrument to guitar instead of vocal.
Wow.
That was a real blow because I just really lost the love of something that I had always loved. It was something that I liked doing, and something that in my life prior to Hillsong had created a lot of opportunities for communal experience with other musicians. And I felt like it was sort of the one that I enjoyed the most, I suppose. So change of major. I started to get really, really tired, and I lost a lot of weight. I was walking everywhere, had no money. I had been trying to get like a casual or part-time job the whole time since I got to Sydney, hadn't got anything. And when I look back now, I just think there's no way I could have, because I had zero availability. I had no availability at all because there was something on every single day. Sundays were out of the question. So I just never got a job the whole time that I was there. So I was broke.
And that's the common experience from, people that talk about being students at Hillsong. There's just, you just can't commit to an employer if you have time at all.
Yeah. So sick of being broke. I think I had enough money from my parents to buy a cup of coffee and a sushi roll every day. And it's not that my parents were stingy, but it's just, I think, funding a 19-year-old uni student and paying Sydney rent, bit hard. And also they were kind of hoping that I'd find a job at that age. So and that just didn't happen. I think it wasn't covered by, like fee help or any government assistance at all. At the time, I didn't qualify for any, like student, what's it called, youth allowance. And that was because that earned too much money.
That's right. So that's government funding for people at university. It's a welfare as such payment. And yet, if you live at home and your parents earn above a certain amount, you're not eligible.
It doesn't take into account their cost of living, how much rent or mortgage or whatever else they've got to pay for. So that was
earning a certain amount, have 10 children, or huge debts, and it just so and yet, I mean, full-time study is full-time study. So
and I'd look around and like I'd see students with like Apple laptop computers and iPhones and $30 flip-flops. Those, those Havaianas that was super in back then. So that was also, there was definitely a big wealth disparity factor at play. So look, what I found was that apart from, the smoke machine irritation thing, I realized one evening, when I was at Powerhouse Youth, singing along or trying to sing along to the praise and worship music, I just realized like I'm spending so much time in a dark auditorium, like this controlled environment with lights and fog machines and PA systems. And I just started to feel this big sense of depersonalisation because I was just spending so much time within that format. It felt like it was becoming my main sort of interface with anything external to me, just always in this place where I had to to sing along or listen along, clap along. And I had gone from having a very Spielbergian childhood, in country Victoria, riding bikes around with friends and having adventures and, all that kind of stuff, to this really quite sort of artificial commercial environment. So that was starting to make me feel quite depressed, if that makes sense. And it was more just like this sort of environmental, or a response to a big environmental change.
Well, and I mean, if the change is to something artificial, then it's no surprise that it's going to change your perspective and how you feel. If you're spending all those hours every day, what's that, 12 times? Yeah, 12 hours a day at times, it's going to affect you, isn't it? If that's the culture is.
Yeah, like a cog in a machine or whatever. So there was that. And then, there was also kind of I noticed sort of a disparity when it came to what volunteer roles were given out. And I do appreciate that, as a first year, you're not going to be prioritized for certain roles. But then I did see that there were first years who were getting opportunities like personal assistant to leaders, pastors, and that kind of thing. And I sort of thought, what did they have to do to get that? And why are they kind of lording it over the others?
What do you think that was about?
It could be any number of things. It could be that they were pastors' kids who were known to Hillsong leadership. It could be that they were just really good at networking. I remember there was one music student, I'm not going to name this student, who, look, there's an attitude at Hillsong which is that it's not good to be a show off. It's not good to try and put yourself out there as a little kind of performing monkey to get the attention of the big worship team and to be sort of fame seeking, if that makes sense. But this particular person, must not have understood that and was just always pulling out his guitar during the times in between sessions or whatever and singing his little heart out, and everyone would go, he's so awesome. And
who are those people? Like, it's so weird that people just start singing and things. I know there's people at parties too, and they're just there in the corner going,
and it's like,
I'm Jim Morrison, I'm great.
It's not the 60s anymore, but there you go.
Yes.
Apparently to him it was. So that didn't have the effect of him being told stop showing off to everyone. He actually sang on an album very early on in his career as a Hillsong College student. Yeah, that behavior was rewarded when I expected that, because it was he to me, I don't have anything personally against him. I do think he was very talented, but he just was in no way a humble person or humble about his musical ability. So yeah, I saw that the lack of humility was rewarded quite often. There were also there was a guy who had a CCM career in another country who joined the college, and he was straight in with the key people or the inner circle, I should say. Yeah, and I think he ended up with a bit of a Hillsong worship leader stint as well.
Nice.
The opinion I ended up forming was that this is kind of like Australian Idol, or it's like the squeaky wheels are getting the grease. It really felt like a performing arts college where everyone's always trying to outdo each other. Sadly.
And not a real center of Christian devotion.
Yeah, not so much. Sadly.
What about the theology students? Were they different?
Yes. So Hillsong had like a partnership with Alpha Crucis College, which prior to that, I think it was called Southern Cross Bible College.
Yes. And it's a very nice partnership. I don't know what the board looks like today, but everybody's on everybody's boards, and Alpha Crucis is the body that accredits the courses that Hillsong College teach. So if they want to run a bachelor degree or a master's degree, it's Alpha Crucis who assesses and accredits that. And it's this really interesting symbiotic kind of interrelation. Yeah.
And Hillsong are the provider. You could start off doing your certificate 3 in whatever it was, pastoral leadership or dance or music or whatever, and then I'm pretty sure you could keep going, and then you could go on to a like a diploma up to degree. But you could also just enroll straight up in a degree through Alpha Crucis. And yeah, I never really rubbed shoulders with them. To me it felt like they were kind of in their own little league. They were the serious degree students.
Right.
A lot of times, a lot of people would be like, shout out to the degree students, from the stage, and they get a great big round of applause.
Well,
Yeah.
because I'm guessing they're the ones that might go on to start mega churches of their own one day.
You would think so. But that being said, I don't know that Carl Lentz finished his studies at Hillsong College. I'm pretty sure Joel Houston only did 6 months. So I guess I'm about as qualified as him.
Look at that. Yeah. It seems to be as qualified as a Houston or a mega church pastor. Okay. So, yeah, what happens next?
Yeah. So I'm feeling a sense of depersonalisation. I'm coughing all the time. I'm getting really over the attitude of other students, or the attitudes, the kind of pyramid structure of the whole leadership thing. The networking environment was exhausting. There was a lot of name dropping all the time amongst students, and stuff like, oh, Nigel Hendroff looked at me the other day. Stuff like that. Just constantly trying to create associations between themselves and what students would refer to as the famous people, the Darlene Czechs and the Reuben Morgans and all of them. So getting a bit disheartened, sick of being broke, sick of living on one cappuccino and one sushi roll a day. And
that's not good. That's not funny at all. These are cult techniques. These are things you read about in the Moonies, or really restrictive cults where they exhaust you. You don't get to eat enough, you don't get to sleep enough, you're overworked, you're disorientated.
Yeah, and I have actually read 1984 by George Orwell as one of my texts in English in Year 12, and I'm not trying to say I'm super smart for comparing Hillsong to 1984 at all, but I could just sort of see systemic parallels, if that's a term. Yeah, just the effect of being so exhausted all the time that you didn't really have an opportunity to assess what's happening to you or to become aware of the system that you're in, if that makes sense. Yeah, it was just getting a little bit, the sheen was wearing off, and Hillsong Conference began to draw quite close, and it's all hands on deck at that point. Once church starts gearing up for conference. Gee, I feel like I'm back there already. I'm using the lingo. They do their 6 hot weekends thing, which is, I think it's the 6 weekends that lead up to Hillsong Conference. Right. And also during that time, students have to do internships, and that's basically just to get through all of this work that otherwise wouldn't get done because of everyone shifting their focus onto Hillsong Conference. So I didn't really feel like I'd forged any kind of professional relationship with any pastors or people in leadership at all who I felt comfortable in approaching about getting an internship, and they put it on the students. Maybe it just saves them work by transferring that responsibility onto students. But in any case, I think the language around it was that you've got to put yourself out there and, make it happen kind of thing. So, yeah, I was like, well, I don't know. I haven't gotten a PA position, or I'm not cleaning floors at, I don't know, so-and-so's house. At that point, I was really strongly considering not continuing, maybe staying in Sydney and trying to go to uni, but yeah, I was just a bit sort of disheartened, and money was such an issue. I felt really bad about the idea of my dad forking out for another semesters. So it was just getting to be a lot of pressure.
Can you tell I'm like an 80s kid, that I love like a horror story, dramatic cliffhanger? But I do think there's a lot of important information in what Laura is saying, and so it's important that you stick around for part 2. I love the detail that she's gone into and the openness with which she's telling a story. So it'll be out ASAP. Do make sure you lurk around the social media of your choice. Keep up with what's going on here. Thank you so much for your time today, spending it with us, catching up with the old newsroom. We will address those issues in part 2. Do make sure you also like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, support us in any way you can. If you're liking what you hear, could even campaign your local MP, because these are our taxes. Keep being kind to you. Keep being kind to the next person. And do what you can. Keep leaving Hillsong. Because we'll talk soon. Bye.